I remember the taste of copper in my mouth when they first told me I had been chosen. The words came from Adept Thalasson, delivered in that monotone voice all administratum clerks seemed to perfect after their first decade of service. Citizen Kalen Voss, designation 77 Alpha 992, you have been selected for the Emperor's sacred service. He did not look up from his data slate when he spoke. His augmetic eye whirred softly as it processed the information scrolling across the screen. The sound reminded me of the grinding wheels in the manufactorum where I had worked for the past 15 years. I stood there in the grey processing chamber, bare feet cold against the metal floor, and tried to understand what those words meant. Sacred service. I had heard whispers, of course. Every citizen of Terra knows there are those who disappear into the depths of the Imperial Palace, never to return. We tell ourselves they are blessed. We tell ourselves they serve a purpose greater than any of us can comprehend. We tell ourselves many things to sleep at night. The copper taste grew stronger. I realized I had bitten my tongue. There must be some mistake, I said, though my voice sounded small in the echoing chamber. I am just a factory worker. I maintain the grinding wheels for wheat processing in Sector Gamma 7. I have no special skills, no training, there is no mistake. Adept Thalasson finally looked up. His human eye was brown, tired, surrounded by the pale skin of someone who had not seen natural light in decades. The selection process is thorough. Your genetic markers, your psychic resonance levels, your psychological profile, all have been reviewed and approved. You will report to Sanctum Level Omega 33 at the 19th hour for preparation. The chamber felt smaller suddenly. The walls, painted that institutional beige that exists nowhere in nature, seemed to press inward. The fluorescent lumens hummed overhead with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I became aware of my breathing, how shallow it had become, how the recycled air tasted of metal and disinfectant. What exactly is sacred service? I asked. For the first time, something almost resembling emotion flickered across the adept's face. It might have been pity. It might have been envy. You will sustain the light that guides humanity through the darkness, he said. There is no greater honor. He returned to his data slate, and I understood the conversation was over. The journey from the processing chamber to my hab unit took 47 minutes through the transport tubes. 47 minutes during which I stared at my reflection in the scratched plasteel windows and tried to reconcile the face looking back at me with the words I had just heard. Chosen, selected, sacred service. The terms felt foreign, like a language I had once known but forgotten. My reflection was unremarkable. 34 years old, brown hair that had started thinning at the crown, grey eyes that held no particular wisdom or strength. A thin scar across my left cheek from a grinding wheel accident 3 years prior, hands calloused from decades of manual labor, fingernails permanently stained with machine oil despite my best efforts to clean them. An ordinary man leading an ordinary life in service to the Imperium, or so I had thought. The hab unit was as I had left it that morning, a single room, 8 meters by 6, containing a cot, a small desk, a food preparation unit, and a lavatory alcove. The walls were the same institutional beige as the processing chamber. On the desk sat a single picked frame containing an image of my parents, both long dead, taken on the day they had been wed 47 years ago. They smiled at the camera with the genuine happiness of people who believed the future held promise. I sat on the edge of the cot and stared at their faces. What would they think of their son's sacred service? Would they be proud, terrified? I realized I did not know what to think myself. The remaining hours passed strangely. I tried to eat but found no appetite. The corpse starch ration, flavored to approximate some long-extinct meat, turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to read from the small collection of approved texts I kept in my desk drawer, but the words swam before my eyes without meaning. The Primer Imperialis, which I had read hundreds of times, might as well have been written in an alien tongue. I tried to sleep but found myself staring at the ceiling panels, counting the small imperfections in the metal plating. 63 dents, 12 rust spots, one panel slightly misaligned with its neighbors. When the chime sounded for the 19th hour, I was ready. The transport system that carried me to Sanctum level Omega-33 was unlike anything I had experienced in my years on Terra. Most citizen transport tubes were utilitarian affairs, designed to move large numbers of people efficiently through the Hive City's endless corridors. This was different. The capsule was smaller, lined with what appeared to be actual wood rather than the synthetic materials I was accustomed to. Brass fittings gleamed in the soft yellow light, and the air smelled of incense rather than recycled atmosphere. There were 7 other passengers in the capsule with me, all of us selected for sacred service, all of us trying to process what that meant. We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, our own fears, our own attempts to understand the magnitude of what was happening to us. The woman across from me was young, perhaps 25, with the pale complexion and slightly hunched posture of someone who spent their days bent over data slates in the administratum's endless filing chambers. Her hands shook as she clutched a small pendant in the shape of the Imperial Aquila. When she noticed me watching, she offered a weak smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mira Kane," she said softly. "Data analyst, 3rd class, sector Beta 9. Kalen Voss?" I replied. "Maintenance technician, Gamma 7. The elderly man beside her looked up from his own contemplation. His hands bore the distinctive burn scars of someone who had worked with Promethium for decades. "Marcus Thorne," he said in a voice roughened by years of breathing industrial fumes. "Fuel processor. Been in the deep works for 38 years. Figured I'd die down there among the pipes and burners. Never expected this." One by one, the others introduced themselves. Helena Vex, a young woman barely 18 who had been working in the textile manufactorum since childhood. Dmitry Vasquez, a middle-aged man whose augmetic arm marked him as a former tech servitor operator. Jaren Cole, a teenager whose nervous energy suggested he had been pulled from one of the lower Hive's youth brigades. Senna Thale, an older woman whose lined face spoke of years in the agridomes, coaxing life from Terra's poisoned soil. Ordinary people, workers, the backbone of the Imperium's vast industrial machine. None of us heroes, none of us particularly special. Just citizens who had somehow drawn the attention of the selection algorithms that governed such things. "Do any of you know what sacred service actually entails?" asked Dmitri, his augmetic fingers tapping nervously against his thigh. No one answered immediately. Finally, Marcus spoke up. "My grandfather used to tell stories," he said, "back when he was young, before the purges of Gehenna. He claimed to know someone who knew someone who had worked in the deep levels of the palace. Said there were places down there where they fed souls to machines, where they turned people into batteries for things too terrible to name." "That's just superstition," Mira said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The Emperor protects. Whatever we're called to do, it serves a purpose." "All service serves a purpose," Helena replied quietly. "That doesn't mean we survive it." The transport capsule began to descend more rapidly. Through the small windows, I could see the architecture changing as we went deeper. The utilitarian corridors of the upper hive gave way to more elaborate construction. Stone replaced metal. Gothic arches soared overhead, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe when viewed directly. The air grew thicker, heavy with incense and the ozone smell of high-energy machinery. We were entering the true heart of the Imperial Palace now, the domain of the Adeptus Mechanicus, where technology and faith merged into something that transcended both. Servo skulls drifted past the windows, their eye sockets glowing red in the dim light. Occasionally, we passed chambers filled with massive machines whose purpose I could not begin to guess. Pipes thick as hab-block corridors carried fluids that glowed with their own light. Cables the size of transport tubes pulsed with electrical current. And everywhere, carved into every surface, painted on every wall, etched into every piece of machinery, was the symbol of the Imperial Aquila. The two-headed eagle that represented humanity's dominion over the galaxy, its wings spread wide, its heads turned to watch both the past and the future. But down here, in the depths, the symbol seemed different somehow, more predatory, as if the eagle was not protecting humanity so much as preparing to devour it. The descent continued for what felt like hours, past foundries that glowed with the heat of artificial suns, past libraries where servo-scribes recorded information on scrolls of human skin, past chambers filled with vat-grown creatures that I tried not to look at too closely. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The weight of 10 millennia of accumulated faith and technology pressed down on us like a physical thing. Finally, the transport came to rest with a soft pneumatic hiss. Beyond the doors lay a corridor that stretched away into shadows, lined with statues of saints I did not recognize. Their faces were twisted in expressions of ecstasy and agony, their hands reaching towards something unseen. Lumens flickered in alcoves, casting dancing shadows that made the statues appear to move. "Citizens," came a voice from outside the transport. "You will disembark. You will follow. You will not speak unless spoken to." The voice belonged to a figure in red robes, a tech adept of the Mechanicus whose face was hidden behind a brass mask shaped like a human skull. His movements were precise, mechanical, as he gestured for us to exit the transport. Other robed figures waited behind him, silent and still as the statues that lined the corridor. We followed them through passages that seemed to stretch forever. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the smell of sanctity and electricity. The sounds of the palace pressed in around us. The distant hum of massive generators, the chanting of tech priests performing their rituals, the whisper of servo skulls passing overhead. And underneath it all, so low it was felt rather than heard, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the very foundations of the structure, the heartbeat of something vast and terrible. We passed through checkpoints guarded by Skitarii rangers, their augmetic limbs clicking and whirring as they scanned us with devices I did not recognize. Each checkpoint took us deeper into the palace, further from the world I had known, closer to whatever fate awaited us in the depths. The corridors began to change again. The Gothic arches gave way to something older, more primitive. Rough-hewn stone replaced worked marble. The carvings became less elaborate but somehow more disturbing. Symbols that hurt to look at directly. Faces that seemed to watch us as we passed. Words in languages that had been old when terror was young. And still we descended. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on an almost liquid quality that made breathing an effort. The temperature fluctuated wildly, scorching heat giving way to bone-deep cold without warning. The lumens flickered more frequently, sometimes leaving us in darkness for long moments before sputtering back to life. It was in one of these dark moments that I heard something that chilled me to the bone. A sound so low it was barely audible, yet so filled with anguish that it seemed to reach directly into my soul and squeeze. It lasted only a moment before the lumens returned and the tech adepts continued their measured pace, but I knew I would carry the memory of that sound for whatever time remained to me. It was the sound of someone screaming in a place too deep for sound to carry. We came at last to a massive archway flanked by 2 custodian guards. Even motionless, even silent, they radiated a presence that made my breath catch in my throat. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were something beyond human, crafted by the Emperor's own hand to be perfection made manifest. Their golden armor gleamed despite the dim light, and their guardian spears hummed with barely contained energy. They did not acknowledge our presence. They did not need to. Their very existence was acknowledgement enough that we had reached a place of supreme importance. Beyond the archway lay a circular chamber with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a smaller version of what dominated the center of the room. Thrones, dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles around a raised dais. And on that dais stood something that made my mind recoil in instinctive terror. A throne larger than the others, more elaborate, more terrible. It was carved from some black substance that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Cables and tubes snaked away from its base, disappearing into the floor and walls. Crystalline structures grew from its arms and back like malignant tumors, pulsing with their own internal light. And connected to those smaller thrones, sitting in them, were people. They were alive, I realized with dawning horror. Their chests rose and fell with the rhythm of breathing, but their eyes stared sightlessly ahead, rolled back to show only the whites. Cables ran from the thrones into their bodies, needles and tubes piercing their arms, their necks, their skulls. The crystalline growths from the central throne had spread to encompass them as well, forming a web of glowing filaments that connected each occupant to the whole. They were not dead.